that's really where then we saw why God kind of timed things out the way he did, and why he had a different story to write. And it kind of started within that first year. I mean, it wasn't right away, it was just kind of like later in the year where we kind of started then being sanctified through each other and through what God was taking us through.
Yeah, I think really the easiest way to describe it is off the terminology of the study we've been going through in Quieting a Noisy Soul. There was a wedge that came between us, and a wedge that I'm now thankful for, but not at the time by any means. But really, that all stemmed from a pretty small argument. Mm-hmm. I mean, or disagreement or whatever, and where we both saw a situation differently. It really was small when you look back on it, but obviously it was important to us, and we were both strong and stubborn and whatever in our stance at the time, and not willing to really work through it how we should have.
It was really tiny. It was good to see what a small conflict can do in every relationship or friendship or marriage or anything can just degrade from a really small splinter that can turn into like a huge wedge. And and stubborn is like the right word, because it wasn't about the thing itself. It was that we were both so set on the other person seeing it from our perspective and just agreeing with us, and yet and that's not the goal of any conflict. It's to unite your heart in it, and not to get the other person to just understand it the way you do, or but so we had a lot of disagreeing conversations surrounding it. Mm-hmm. And then I don't know, would you say then we just stopped talking about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think just looking back on it, I'm not a journaler as good as Allie, so I can't look back through my journal of my thoughts, which she can, which is kind of cool, more so than but I do clearly remember those times. And for me, I remember feeling right, in my stance, and we both kind of felt like we were in a good place spiritually when this took place, and we were both desiring to walk with the Lord, but because of our different sides of this, I felt like I was right, and thus I didn't feel a need to change, and so for me, I was just waiting for you.
Yeah, to change.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep. And
funny thing, I was doing the same.
So it kind of led to confrontation right away, and then basically separation when it comes to talking about that, and distance in our relationship as well, for sure.
And it was we never let, in that moment, and maybe in that couple months surrounding that time, we never sought the Lord to really to humble our heart in it, and to or I never did. I never wanted or thought I should seek the Lord, and he should show me what's going on in my heart and why we can't have unity in this, and so that wasn't the way it was. It was strictly about the issue, and it was strictly about this is what I think, and I think this is right, and so just with time it won't be a big deal, and so that was a good lesson too, to realize that stuff shouldn't just be left, because left in that sense of justice of I know what's right and they'll just figure it out, it wasn't we left arguments or anything slamming doors at each other. It was just they were left undealt with, and so that was really good to learn about how that can then erode, because then in my heart, it just continued to be something that was like undealt with and led to anger and bitterness surrounding it, unknowingly. Like you don't even know it's growing. And but I think that's a really good point that you mentioned, that we were like walking with the Lord and serving Him in the lives of our friends and church, and so like it was like an everyday conflict.
Yeah.
But it wasn't like it caught us in a time where we were like spiritually lacking or off the rails, like far left or anything. And so that was like good to be sober about too.
Yeah. I mean, as that conflict went undealt with for us, it continued to grow in the effects of it, obviously. And like I said, for me, I was just waiting for her because I felt like I was in a good place spiritually. I felt like I was right. I felt like I was making the wise choice, but it really didn't have anything to do with the conflict anymore. It didn't have anything to do with the specific issue. It had to do with God teaching us how to work through conflict together. And we're both wired similarly to where we're not going to get in crazy shouting matches and stuff like that. But we probably are both more likely, especially at that time, to avoid the conflict and
be stubborn.
Yeah.
Both stubborn.
And now, thankfully, God taught us that before we were married. I think we do a much better job of talking about things in the moment,
Yeah, or at least now we recognize it. And yeah, when you live in something, it's then recognizable later.
Yeah.
Or God shows it to you later.
Yeah, so as I waited, thinking that's all I was doing, I was listening to a sermon, and I can't remember who it was by, or really what the text was. But the quote that stuck with me is, and I'm somewhat paraphrasing it, but he said, "What God does in you while you wait is often more important than what it is you're waiting for." And I realized that though I was just waiting for her to change and come around, God didn't want me to just idly wait. And God wanted me to actively wait, because what he wanted to do in my heart was much more important during that time than resolution to this little conflict. He wanted to teach me so much more about what was in my heart, and to help me to seek him and to work through our conflict in a different way, to help us vertically focus and help me vertically focus. And so that quote really stuck with me, because I realized that I was just waiting, and that's easy to do in the Christian life, and that's why it stuck with me now, because I can fall into these patterns of waiting on whatever is next to come and not, be actively pursuing what he wants to do in that time of waiting. So
it was something that was undealt with, and so it grew. Anger on my part, which I guess started just with like resenting like the way that all went down, and that someone would not demand, but like, just expect me to see it the way they see it, or just kind of adopt their viewpoint, or and then that led to like bitterness, and how it started, just with us, but then I do remember, and I didn't journal anything about it, but I do remember starting to see it affect other areas after it went undealt with for a few months, but then other things in my life, it takes over. One thing in your life will take over other areas, because that's the place God wants to work. And so when you quench him there, you quench him everywhere, and it eroded my like spiritual walk until like through my mom realizing like something needs to change, like I need to make a decision. This is either over, or you're gonna work through this, and you're gonna like pursue God in it. And so seeking the Lord through it, he took me, and I was studying through 1st and 2nd Kings, and he started to show me and give me the picture in there of idolatry, and and reading like a couple other books too about setting up idols in your heart and things that come and captivate your heart. And so that was really good. He showed me like how the Israelites went going through that, those so many years, were going and setting up these places of pagan worship, and reading about the high places that were constantly worshipped, king after king after king after king, and waiting for like someone to do something about them, because they would go to the temple and still like live that two-faced life of doing what their God prescribed for them ceremonially at the temple, but then worshiping these high places and following pagans. And so God started to reveal to me that was what I was doing in my heart too. Like, we want to hold on to something. We take different things, and they're good things, or they're things of pain or hurt or something, and we choose to not let God in that, and we choose to like not let Him deal with that and give that to Him. And they become a high place. They become an idol. And because A.W. Tozer says the essence of idolatry is entertainments of thoughts about God that are unworthy of Him. And so therefore it's like anything good or bad or hard. And so he started to give me that picture and teach me. And I got frustrated with the Israelites, interestingly enough, when God was showing me that was like what was in my own heart, and how and there was the king that, you know, came and tore them down, and then the people built them back up again. And I had that pattern in my life. I'd give the conflict to God, and then I'd build it back up. And so it was Him showing me that I was taking my hurt and bitterness and holding on to it, and that was my idol. And so a turning point for me was Psalm 51, in realizing kind of during this time period, like I thought when our relationship was decaying, like I thought that was just like between me and you, and that it was like things I was saying towards you, you know, like we knew how to like get under each other's skin and what was gonna like provoke the other person's flesh, and like we got to know each other's sin really well, and me anyway, like, yeah. And so then being, you know, like our flesh, and being manipulative in the way it is, would say things to be like, there it is, there's the pride, like, and so I thought it was like between me and Ryan, but going through Psalm 51, God really broke me, and that was a turning point, just as I wanted to move through this and wanted to seek the Lord on it, to realize that this whole time, my anger, my bitterness, my hurt about what went on between us was ultimately toward God. It was an idol I had toward Him, and that it wasn't about this earthly relationship. It ultimately is a wrong view of God. And so I'll just read from like some journal entries that I had, that I thank God that He impressed in my heart to write stuff down, because then hopefully you're blessed by them, and it's more real than I guess what I could share like today on it. So I'll just read a couple things that kind of encapsulate what was going on in my heart during that time of trying to really like rid my heart of this idol that I had set up. And okay. So last night we were talking about something stupid, probably the conflict, and Ryan kind of raised his voice. Instantly I got all defensive, but of course no one understands why I would. It's been my reaction all this time. He got all frustrated. I left crying. It felt tense around the whole van, and I was mad. Because last week I tried to explain my issues with him, why I respond the way I do. I held it in. The bitterness roared up again. This morning I had read Psalm 51:4. Against you, you only have I sinned and done this evil in your sight. My anger isn't against Ryan, it's against God. God did nothing but allow the conversation to happen. God, I understand my anger is toward you, you who only deserve blessing and honor and praise for everything you've done for me. God, you have to change my heart. I plead, Lord. I give you my anger, my bitterness, and hurt. Fill me with you in the joy of your salvation. I pray this with the greatest earnestness I can muster.
I don't want to be a hindrance to your work. Psalm 102, hear my prayer, O Lord, and let my cry come to you. Do not hide your face from me in the day of my trouble. Incline your ear to me in the day that I call. Answer me speedily. And so I had several prayers written down, just constantly giving him my anger and my bitterness and acknowledging it as an idol that I set up, an idol that has has hands but can't handle, eyes but can't see, ears that can't hear, and are slowly turning into that idol as it talks about in Psalm 115. And I was slowly becoming more and more lifeless in my spiritual walk. And so one thing that just really encouraged me, and I hope is like a blessing involving like hurt and stuff, is I just wrote that there's nothing wrong with hurt, it's how we handle it. The minute I set expectations on humans regarding this hurt, it becomes an idol. Because idolatry starts with thoughts about God that are unworthy, these expectations on humans cohabit with the belief that God is not able or willing to fully and completely be my comfort and my fortress during that time of hurt. Wow, that sheds light on the issue. God is saying, am I not enough? Is what I've done not enough? And slowly God was just like showing me that it's an idol because I'm not letting him be God in that, and instead held on to it and made that a conflict that I thought was just between us. But he was slowly showing me that no, it's ultimately, and everything in our life is ultimately between him. Everything that we have between us and another person, it's vertical first, and then it's horizontal.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean...
Sorry, I feel like that was really long.
Yeah, I think Psalm 51 comes up a lot in times of conflict, in times of allowing the Lord to work in our hearts. And, you know, in Psalm 51 it talks about that the Lord desires a broken spirit, a broken and contrite heart. And that's what God needed to do in my life, because pride was an issue. Because like I said, I was just waiting for a change to take place, and then I had expectations of what she would do to then make things good again, you know, because I was in the right spot, you know. And so so really I think one of the big things God taught us through that, though it's probably continued to build from that, one of the side things we learned was to recognize and die to expectations, because we easily can place expectations on each other, whether it's throughout a day, a work day, going over to families, or on vacation, or anything really. It can be any normal day, and we can have expectations. I can have expectations of how I think that day will go, or how I think what I think we'll do, or what I think she'll do. And when those expectations aren't met, then it triggers pride in my heart, or selfishness. And really, pride and selfishness were things that God was teaching me through this time. And realizing that I was holding on to expectations, and I was pridefully standing in my place, and I was selfish about what I thought needed to happen. And God used a lot of different texts in my life and in Allie's life during that time. One that stood out and he kind of kept bringing me back to was the story of Hosea. And the story of Hosea, Christ commands Hosea to take himself Gomer as his wife, and Gomer a wife of that plays the adulteress, that isn't faithful to him. As they're married, then Gomer goes to play the part of the harlot. She is unfaithful to Hosea. And during that time in Hosea chapter 2, we see through the parallels of the picture, Hosea's life is essentially a sermon, a illustration, a picture of God's love for Israel, Hosea's love for Gomer. And through that in chapter 2, we see that though Gomer was out trying to find satisfaction and love in the arms of different lovers, Hosea all the while was the one that was actually providing for her and caring for her and making sure she was clothed and fed. And then it brings us to chapter 3.
And the Lord said to me, "Go again, love a woman who is loved by another man and is an adulteress, even as the Lord loves the children of Israel, though they turn to other gods and love cakes of raisins. So I bought her for 15 shekels of silver and a homer of barley. And I said to her, You must dwell as mine for many days. You shall not play the whore or belong to any other man. So I also will be to you."
Gomer had fallen to the place where she was being sold, auctioned off as a slave, and she had hit below the bottom. And Hosea shows up by the command of the Lord to purchase her back. And Hosea is in a position of leadership. There was people knew what was going on here, and so because of that, and because of what Gomer had done, that had to weigh heavily on Hosea and give him a bad look, a bad name, a bad reputation, maybe, Gomer dragged his name through the dirt by leaving him as if he wasn't enough. And the Lord says to Hosea, "Go buy her back, bring her back." And that's what the Lord's telling us as Hosea tells Gomer, to come back and remain faithful. But no matter what, whether or not you're faithful to me, I will remain faithful to you. And that's what the Lord's telling us. And that's what, during that time, I realized my view of God's love wasn't what it should be. I didn't see God's love accurately, and I didn't see God for who he was in my life, and I didn't see myself as Gomer. And I easily could hold on to my pride, I could hold on to my selfishness, I could justify my position and where I was at spiritually, where I was at in our relationship and the conflict. And it wasn't until God showed me that I was Gomer and I was running from the Lord, or I was turned from the Lord. I wasn't seeking him in every situation of my life and looking to him and dying to self. And as he showed me and gave me a more accurate view of his love for me, then he used that to start to draw me to himself and to allow me to then see through the reflection or through the picture of his love what was really at work in my heart, and started to help me to see the pride and selfishness.
And God used Hosea in my life to one of the verses that I didn't copy it from my journal. I just put Hosea 12. But had to do with the fact that God in his grace even allows us to return. He allows us to see that we are Gomer and that we're running. And our life is running, even if we think it's only one issue that we're resisting in. We're surrendered to God and everything else but one place. We're still moving, kind of like the escalators that Pastor Jordan was talking about.
Mm-hmm.
You're either moving toward him or away from him, and what you allow him to do in those areas is what's actually real for your spiritual walk. And Hosea 12, some verse in Hosea 12 says, yes, he, talking about Jacob, struggled with the angel and prevailed. He wept and sought favor of him. He found him in Bethel, and there he spoke to us. So you, by the help of your God, return. And like, and God just used that to show me that it has to be a wholehearted, whole life, every issue, not just the ones that we want to bring to Him. We have to seek Him. He will speak, and by His grace, He'll help us return.
Yeah.
Then what happened?
Yeah, I mean, as God continued to work in our hearts, and this conflict dragged out for a good amount of time.
It just kind of got worse and worse.
Yeah, and I would say the process of the point of the conflict to I feel like it kind of ended. I mean, not ended, but God was continuing to do that work in our lives all the way up until getting married there. And another text that He used in my life was in Ephesians 5. It's very familiar text, but in light of what He showed me of His love in Hosea, a love that's unquenchable, a love that's we can't wrap our arms around, we can't understand and comprehend the love of God, because when we were at our worst, when we had nothing to offer Him, we didn't bring any beauty to the table, when He gave His life for us, when He took that step to love us, and when He demonstrated His love for us, we were very unlovable. And then seeing that love that He has and growing in an understanding of that love changed the way that I looked at this verse in Ephesians 5. Ephesians 5:25 says, "Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave Himself up for her." And to love as Christ loves, in light of what He was teaching me. And then it says, and gave Himself up for her. Like Christ loved us in a way that He literally gave Himself up for us. He died to His own will. I mean, the Lord went or Christ prayed, "If it be your will, let this cup pass from me." And yet He followed through with that, because that was the will of the Father, and loved us in spite of having to take our sin on the cross. So if I'm to love Allie with that kind of love, then I know that I have to get out of the way. I mean, to that point, I loved Allie with the love of Ryan. And the love of Ryan has nothing to offer, you know? And really, even now, in our, as we grow in our marriage, if I see something is off with Allie, that's the first place I go to, is to look, is my heart where it should be? Because if I've resorted to loving her with the love of Ryan, and I'm not where I should be vertically with the Lord, and allowing the Lord to love Allie through me, and to see the love of Christ in my life, then it's going to create problems, you know? And so that's really what He was teaching me through that time, and that I needed to die to my will in the situation. I needed to die to my desires. And I thought I had many times. Like, I had gone so many times in prayer and like given it to the Lord. I was like, "Lord, this is yours. Like, do what you want with it," you know, like, but it wasn't until He really brought this together that I really truly let go of it, with no desire of my own anymore, no will of my own. And I was willing completely to just pursue Him and allow Him to take it from there and direct however.
And you let like us go. Like it was,
Yeah.
I think I remember you saying like, we talked about how you're like, it was always, you surrendered it with the idea that we'd end up together, that
Right.
we'd like, that we had a future, and that it was different when like, when He took you through true surrender, that it was like, it meant it maybe nothing, you know, like
Right.
that, like your expectations were completely pulled out. And I like remember, I've shared this like with you, like the time where like God was like teaching you that, and it really does like silence like wrath and just put an end to everything, like because I like as we were like going back and forth about something, and I like said something knowing exactly like how you'd respond, and like expecting to see like there's Ryan's pride, you know, looking back at me, and it was love, and it was like, and then I had no words, and it was a different spirit. And like you said, like even now, like just knowing when our flesh gets going, sometimes that leads to then conflict or something gets tense inside of me, and after you pause, a different spirit comes back in, and like and God like speaks like through it, and you lead in that way. You led like in our relationship in that way, in like silencing me, like I like still can like feel where I was sitting, and realizing this is different. I don't know what this is, and I didn't recognize it because it was God like speaking in that moment, and that just fueled me to desire to continue to pursue what God had for us in this, and like you still like continue to lead with like conflicts today, you know, and God was teaching me like similarly about like what love really is. And it's interesting that you grow up in a Christian home and have always known Christ died for us, and greater love has no one than this, than he laid down his life for his friends. And like you learn, you know all this, right? You know it, and how like that can just so not translate to you and another person, you know, and realizing what love is. And so as we did start to pursue the Lord, and for me letting him into all these areas, like he was teaching me what love did. And I remember one time like ending a conversation in tears, and then like God brought right then like what would love do, and it would get back and try to talk through it and try to be humbled in it, and there are some painful conversations of trying to work through that and trying to let you in to like the mess that was going on in my heart, because I knew love would like let go of itself and not seek itself and try to extend to the other person, or to lay down their life for the other person. So as we were kind of like working through, as God was starting to well, first bring us to brokenness and then like put back the pieces, we were learning that that's what it looks like. It's laying yourself down, and it's not seeking your own. It's seeking the good of the other person, even when that's so painful, and can feel like you're just like choosing to soak in the pain of like dying to yourself. Like there's a reason why it says die to self. Like dying is not like a good feeling. Like there was some conversations where it was like it would hurt so bad to just like work through it, you know, to talk through it, and yeah, and so he was teaching me that that's what love was, and yet we had the picture of what love was for so long, you know, and I was thankful that he had us practicing that as he was teaching us. We got to a place where we were like I kind of see it as a phase of like we became friends again, like, you know, like, so then we became like really close friends. Like I don't know, had grown so far apart that then it was a long process of God sanctifying us of that sin, and reaching out to the other person in acts of love, and so and then eventually like you're like my best friend. But
I think as just looking back on it, as God did this work in our lives, he led us to a point to where we were both completely letting go of our expectations, dying to ourselves in this situation, and by no means perfected in the work, but to a place where God then wanted to bring us to where we could see and die and surrender to His will in our relationship. And really, when that happened, it was kind of like a pretty immediate change. And one of the songs that we had played at our wedding was "Come Thou Fount," and that's like ever since then been one of my favorite songs still. Like, it became a favorite during that time, probably for both of us. And it started with Allie, and then she kind of shared it with me, and then I went with that, so I'll let you share.
To where the song and everything.
Yeah.
So I mean, like, so we became like really close friends, but and I was probably nearing the end of college, and so it's like we'd seen how God had like restored us, but I was like, but I'm never gonna be a wife. Like, I just didn't have anything that like it was like so like funny that like He was teaching us how to love the other person, how to lay down your life for someone, but I still had in my mind that like in order to get married I gotta still have my like Disney view of love. And because like, you know, I was like the 90s Disney kid and like Hallmark kid of like, you know, that's what I grew up on, and so I had this idea of how I should feel and how I should be and everything. And so, and I did start like journaling a lot of prayers, like and just kept saying like, Lord, like, you know, teach me, help me to love Ryan as you love him, and teach me that love. And like this is one that I just like, God, I want to come into your presence and be still. I want to meditate on your love. I want you to be my guide. Lord, you control my life. You set things in motion according to your will. I have no claim on my life, for it was bought with a price. Your timing is perfect. Help me love Ryan as you love him. Give me eyes to see your love. And I just have a lot of prayers in my journal on like, help me love Ryan. And in my way, I was thinking like, love Ryan, like in that closeness, bring that like, you know, that love that I think is, you know, what's supposed to be in like a fiance or in a bride, you know, and everything. And I was thinking that was my expectation of that will be the cue that then I know it's your timing to move forward with marriage. And our relationship wasn't really like, it wasn't really a movie relationship up to that point. So I don't know why all of a sudden like it would just kick in then, and all of a sudden I'd be able to like, now I've seen all of these films and now I know that it's time to be married. But and so I think so God just showed me that it's his timing. I kept asking him, just like, give me your love for Ryan, like just like, you know, come through me, and then I'll know, and I can tell him we're ready, let's move forward. And so there was this kind of expectation in my heart and a fear of stepping out into something and moving forward if I felt differently. And I mean, in kind of like our whole relationship, you felt a little differently at times than I did, because you're just older. Like, yeah. I was always 2 years behind, like, and then, yeah, I don't know. So so the context of like then when God really spoke through that after several months of like praying in that way was mowing. After probably I was done with college and mowing for my dad that summer and listening to some preacher, don't know who, preach on through 1 Samuel, and they were going to go fight the Philistines. And so I'll just read, because I wrote down like what they were going through. 1 Samuel 7 says, all the people of Israel mourned and sought after the Lord. If you are returning to the Lord with all your hearts, then rid yourselves of the foreign gods and the Ashtoreths and commit yourself to the Lord and serve him only, and he will deliver you out of the hand of the Philistines. So the Israelites served the Lord only. Then Samuel took a stone, names it Ebenezer, and says, thus far the Lord has helped us. And the preacher was talking about the fact that they had this fear of moving forward and stepping to face the Philistines.
And all they had to do was remember the faithfulness of the Lord. And raising Ebenezer was the memorial of saying, like, up to this point, like this whole time, the Lord has helped us and the Lord has been with us each step of the way. Why would we fear now what lies ahead? It's not the Philistines, it's the God that's been faithful, and he's going to continue to be faithful as we face the Philistines. And that was what their hope was in, and their surety was in. And so then I'll just read what I journaled after God kind of met with me, because I was meditating on that and singing Come Thou Fount, because I was like, that's what Ebenezer means. Like, you know, like we sing the hymn, like, and it's like, whoa. And so I was like singing it, and then it was during that time of meditation that the Spirit just said, go. And then I was afraid, because I was like, I don't know what this means. I was supposed to do something about this, but I have no idea what go means. And so, so I'll just read them, like what I journaled afterward. This afternoon, God spoke to me. He illuminated my fear and lack of faith. I doubted that he would bring about spiritual intimacy between Ryan and I. I didn't have the faith to move forward until I saw it. As I confessed my doubt and worry to him, I raised my Ebenezer. Only by you have I made it thus far. And he said, go. It took a little bit for my head to understand. Initially, my heart was overwhelmed. It knew God answered my prayer, showing me that he was smack dab in the middle of it all, controlling it by his timing. As I was praying this song and verse back to him, my head finally caught up. God told me to move forward, go get engaged. He said, you asked to love him as I. Well, I sought him when a stranger. I knew I was supposed to obey, move forward, and trust that God would bring about closeness in his time. My heart was so filled with him and joy. I literally felt as though I was engaged. Earthly emotions are a cheap imitation of the joy that God will supply in his time. And he just reminded me of that, like I'm singing like the verse, you know, Jesus sought me when a stranger, running from the throne of God. And God was like, you've been asking to love him, and like I've been teaching you what that is. Like, you do love him, and maybe you just don't have like what you think that like fiance feels like, but and he just told me to trust him with that and step out and don't have fear, just obey. And so we did, and because he's a good God, he brings that, you know, in his time he brings feelings of emotions. But I think of so much that I know that that's not what holds a marriage together, that's not why you step into a marriage, and that's not when you dictate when something's over. It's not about like the way you feel. It's knowing that the Lord's in it and that he's moving you toward that and holding you together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And obviously God continues to work in our sinful hearts, but very thankful for how he did work in our lives leading up to marriage. And we can look back on that time as a rock of remembrance, a memorial in our life of when God drew us closer to him and did a work in our hearts. And we're thankful for that, because too, even the picture of marriage I would have not understood in the same way going into that had God not done this work beforehand. And marriage and that wedding day is one of the coolest pictures of Christ's love for the church and our opportunity to testify of that love that you just get once in your life, to have all these friends and family and people together, to then see a wedding and a marriage take place that is symbolic of Christ's love for the church, and that's what it's a picture of and a testimony to. And to be reminded of our salvation and what Christ did for us. And while we were unlovable, while we were running from him, while we had nothing to offer, and we didn't bring anything to the table, but we not only did that, but we went and looked for satisfaction and for love in the arms of other lovers. But Christ loved us and gave himself for us. And that's the picture Christ's love for the church, and that's the picture of unity in marriage. And we were able to see that and understand that and have excitement for that day in a completely different way because of how he had taught us that and shown us that in our heart. So thanks for the opportunity to share with you guys, and we're just excited what God continues to teach us, because he will, because coming soon.
October of 2020.
We are expecting our first.